Yes.
Is that...
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this will go better. What cable do we have?
That might be the maxed out.
Are we good? Okay. Yay. Only 5 minutes in transition. This is perfect.
Yeah.
Make it go. And we are live on the internet, I think. If the internet works. Are we good?
Like, do you want this anywhere else? I can get this closer.
Nope, I think that's testing. 1, 2. Put it back where it was. Yeah, great.
Audio sounds awesome.
Cool.
Audio go.
Yeah.
1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. All right, let's do a show, everybody. Who here likes podcasts? Yay, we do too. Okay, and we're starting our podcast in 3, 2. This is TWIS, This Week in Science, episode number 759, recorded on Friday, February 14th, 2020. For the love of science! I'm Dr. Kiki, and today we will fill your head with sweat dreams, flowers, and viruses. But first...
Disclaimer. The following program might sound like science news, but actually it is not. It is, at best, somewhat adjacent to the science news that is going on. If this were actual science news, the sound you are now hearing would be replaced with a recently published paper you would need to read. And in some cases, the reading would require some back study to properly understand. But there exists an unbroken chain of attachments between you and science here. First, only that which is published can be considered science news. Only that which is made public, that which is exposed to the scrutiny and mutiny of unsympathetic peer review, is actually science news. Even then, this is not the source of the science news. That thing which research is attempting to observe is the actual source. Everything else is attached to this original source. Observations in an experiment are attached to the thing being observed. The data is attached to the experiment, the paper attached to the data, the publication is attached to the paper, the scientist then attaches the publication, the journalist attaches themselves to the scientist, and then the public attaches themselves to the journalist. And this show then is not merely a science news show, but it is a way for you, the listener, to attach yourself to everything that is happening this week in science. Coming up next. This is the part where the audience is encouraged to dance along. Yes, it's
an interactive dance party podcast.
We are on stage. You should not feel embarrassed to move and gesticulate however you feel.
What's happening? What's happening? In science.
Yes, for those who can't see, the audience is absolutely losing their minds.
They're going crazy.
They've gone absolutely. We may have started a little bit of a dance right here. Good science to you, Kiki and Blair.
And good science to you too, Justin, Blair, and you, our listener out there. Welcome to another episode of This Week in Science. We have an amazing show ahead. I'm super excited because we're recording live on Valentine's Day.
Aww.
Love is in the air at the SciMike stage, which is brought to us by This Study Shows, a Wiley podcast, at the American Association for the Advancement of Science annual meeting in Seattle, Washington. Hi, everyone. So good to be here. We're glad you are here as well. We brought science, yes? Okay, good. I was hoping that we'd talk about science at a science conference. Yes. But, you know, I'm going to talk about romance too. Like I mentioned in the intro, I've got sweat dreams for you. What did you bring, Justin?
I've got 2 different virus stories.
Viruses. That sounds catching. Yes. Blair?
I brought a Valentine about pollinating opossums.
Pollinating, like going around and pollinating opossums? Or opossums that pollinate?
You'll find out.
Okay. We will find out. We also have an interview today. And before we get to that, I would like to remind you that if you are not subscribed to the This Week in Science podcast, you can find us all places that podcasts are found. You can tell your friends to find us all places that podcasts are found by looking for This Week in Science everywhere. We're everywhere. Or you can just visit TWIS.org, which is our website. All right, into the science. I need to start with some of those aforementioned sweat dreams. It's time. Love is in the air. After a romantic Valentine's Day dinner, you're going to be full and maybe sleepy, and you will fall asleep in the arms, cuddling with your partner, right? Well, maybe I don't want to go to what people will be doing, but researchers publishing in the journal Psychological Science wanted to find out how the scent of partners affects people's ability to sleep. So they had significant others wear t-shirts for 24 hours without doing any exertive exercise activity, so nothing that would make them sweat necessarily, without putting on any perfumes or antiperspirants or anything of that sort, so that over 24 hours, the shirt would be infused with the aroma of the partner.
So, some of the aromas.
Some of the aromas. Immediately upon taking off the shirt, they stuffed it in a Ziploc baggie and threw it in the freezer until they started the study. Now, some people in the study got to go to sleep using the t-shirt of their significant other as a pillowcase. Other people had to sleep on the t-shirts of strangers.
No.
Oh, wow.
I hate that.
You hate it. Oh my goodness. They looked to see how people reported the quality of their sleep, and they also measured the number of hours that people slept well. They used an activity tracking wrist-worn device to determine whether or not people were wakeful and moving around in the night, so that they could actually see what kind of sleep people were getting and how much. Turns out, if you're sleeping with your partner's scent, you get 9 more minutes of sleep a night.
Not
Nine more minutes. This is actually on par with melatonin supplements that people take. So
Those
average,
supplements only give you 9 more minutes?
it's an average. It's an average. But
Yeah.
the result here implies that the odor of people who are close to us, who are familiar to us, can actually positively impact our ability to sleep and how well we sleep, which I think that's pretty good news. And for everyone who's traveled here to AAAS from elsewhere and you're sleeping alone, why did you not bring a t-shirt from your partner?
This is something actually I do already.
You do this?
Yes.
Well, you brought your partner this time.
I did, but if he wasn't here, I would have brought one of his t-shirts. I already do this. This is very interesting.
Well, but the flip side of that is, it's only 9 minutes and you're okay sleeping with a stranger. I don't know.
Like I said, this is an average, but if it does help you sleep better in that hotel far away from home, maybe, take a scarf, a t-shirt, something that smells like home. Anyway, love and sweat are in the air on TWIS. If you're interested in TWIS items of merchandise, t-shirts, other things of that sort, we have a Zazzle Store. You can go to TWIS.org, click on the Zazzle link. Mugs, t-shirts, fun things like that. We've got a lot of them. Now, I would like to bring up our guest for the show, Kyle Sanders. He runs an organization called Science Riot. So please come to the stage, Kyle, and tell us about yourself. Yes.
Hello.
Hello. So you run an organization called Science Riot, so obviously you can yell and project, and you don't need a microphone.
I don't. No. That's fine. No, I co-founded this organization a few years ago with Dr. Kiki Spahich. We're a nonprofit that trains scientists in public speaking through stand-up comedy.
Okay, so 2 things you put together here, scientists and stand-up comedy. That is not normally something that is put together. In fact, people, when you think of the stereotypical scientist, you're not thinking funny.
I think we thought, what is the scariest experience possible for scientists? And let's just do that.
That's what I was thinking, trial by fire, right? Yeah.
Yeah. We're not the first ones to do this. This has actually been pioneered by University College London, their Bright Club program in the UK, and they were gracious enough to help us get started. But we've really focused on the training experience for scientists, really walking them through somebody who has no experience in science communication, and then giving them the confidence and the skills to get up in front of 300 strangers and do it live for the first time.
Tell me about that process. How do people come in, and then is there a transformation over the training process? I mean, I've been doing not stand-up, but standing up with a microphone and talking in front of crowds for years. But I mean, how is that process for the people who go through your program?
So the program itself is about a month long. We have workshops over 3 weeks leading up to show night. Anyone can sign up in a city that we host the program, but the transformation actually happens a minute into their stand-up set when they get their first big laugh and they're like, it's working. And then you can see them just relax into this confident speaker that we knew they could be the whole time.
So it's a blossoming, like a butterfly emerging from the chrysalis.
It's a lot like skydiving when they're, they close their eyes and jump out of the plane and they're just panicking until they open their chute and realize, oh, this is working, and they're safe.
Do you make sure that people are going to be funny so that they don't bomb? Because stand-up comedy is hard.
Yeah, who's writing the material?
So the scientists write their own material. We work with professional comedians over the course of the 3-week workshop to develop their content, their voice, their personality, and let that shine. Our audiences also know this is their first time ever trying this. So expectations are exceedingly low, and they exceed them. But you'd be surprised. People who come to our show really are like, this isn't their first time, but it is. And I think with a little confidence and a little encouragement, peer feedback, they really do well.
And then what do people go on and do with this newfound ability?
Well, and we started to view this not just speaker training, but media training. They've gone out and done media interviews where they're confident, they have jokes that they know will work. We've had some of our graduates go and organize other outreach events, step into leader roles at Nerd Night and other types of outreach events that they didn't feel confident to do before. And actually in Chicago, a group from our cohort like to band together in this crucible experience, but they went out and pursued an improvisational troupe to host weekly science-themed events that they participated in on stage. So it leads to all sorts of other outreach.
I think that's one of the most important aspects, to make a scientist feel comfortable in leaving the laboratory and engaging with individuals, with crowds. But having that confidence is maybe one of the most important first steps.
Yeah, just fake it till you make it. Most academics report never having any communications training except for these conferences. And so a lot of what we do is deprogramming what academia teaches, establishing credibility in your credentials, and actually teaching them to connect in a personal way with the audience first. And once they do that, the rest is actually really easy. The comedy is the last thing we worry about. And if you do everything else and you're relatable, the comedy is the easy part.
And actually, I could see it having a positive effect if they bomb.
Yeah.
Because then you're out of your element, you're trying to tell jokes, nobody's laughing. Totally mortifying to be on stage with a negative.
You're speaking from experience, aren't you?
But from then on, everything is easy. Once you bomb at comedy, anything else you take on in terms of public speaking, way easier.
I could bomb, I will survive.
Yeah.
Life goes on, it's okay.
And so I'll say, nobody has bombed in our program with like a little asterisk. We have had some people do this who thought this is the scariest thing they could ever do, who really struggled with stage fright. And they maybe got hung up during their talk, and the audience applauded them through that. They checked their notes, recovered, and did great. So nobody is really bummed. We are, however, starting to train our first varsity team, away team, who's planning on bombing at actual professional comedy clubs and seeing how, hopefully they won't, but they're preparing for the worst.
So you've got the graduates who are going on, they're doing the master's program. They're
Exactly.
they're continuing it, and they're really like, we have the science comedian. There's a person performing here who is a science comedian. Are they aiming for that kind of caliber?
Well, and what we're trying to do is be the minor leagues. So you have these incredible science comedians who devoted years to figuring this out, and then you have people that have no clue how to get started. And we want to be the pipeline in between that, can bring new faces and new voices to news and media. And I think that that's the goal. In this case, they are continuing to develop. They realize this is something they're really interested in getting better at. And so they're working together and coming up with hopefully a good polished thing for audiences that maybe aren't showing up for science.
I mean, if that audience mentality shows up at a conference, because I haven't seen any heckling since I've been here, which there might be some fun counterpoints.
Don't ask for it. No, stop.
There might be some fun counterpoints that could come out of improvising a little bit, interacting directly with an audience. That's,
we have seen that, and that's questions that are not questions. And it happened at every conference, I think.
Oh, yeah, I've run into a few of those.
Questions that are comments.
Do you have a question? Do you have a question?
Is there a question?
Is there a question in that statement? Yes. Do you have if you give workshops and you do these trainings, but do you have one piece of advice for maybe the scientists or other people in our audience who might want to look at what they do with a humorous eye?
Yeah.
How do you start approaching something from a comedic slant?
Yeah, there's been some great panels here at AAAS, and one of them was showing how people not interested in science will show up for comedy. And sometimes just giving something a pop culture twist or a comedy appeal can really bring in new audiences. And if you're afraid to do this, in academia we're trained not to have a personality on stage, just stick to the facts and not have opinion. But when you're talking with the public, they want your opinion. They want to know what you think. And so lead with your personality and really let your passions, your interests, let that lead the way, and the audience will meet you there.
Okay, so I can make cat jokes and
yes,
they're
always effective.
Always good. And where can people find information about Science Riot and trainings that you're doing?
We're in 7 cities, and if you're near one of our locations, you can sign up at scienceriot.org. If you're at a university or somewhere else who's interested in this, we're happy to come out. But I highly recommend you come to the Science Talk Conference in Portland. We will be training a group of scientists who are preparing right now, and they will be performing a public show in advance, but also at the conference so you can see them live.
I am so excited about that. I'm really looking forward to seeing the comedic acts and how these scientists present. And maybe I'll be that heckler in the back.
I'm no heckling, Kiki. It's a supportive environment.
I'm supportive as a heckler. No.
It's a nice heckle. It's still a heckle.
I'm friendly. I'm supportive. I believe in you. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you very
joining
much.
us today. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks.
Yes. Do you want us? You can stay and hang out and chat science with us if you want. Are you funny
It's
enough?
a lot of pressure.
I know.
It's like, want me to stay?
You can sit here.
What kind of time commitment are we talking?
Like a half hour.
All right.
That's rough.
Okay.
Woo.
I'll brace up. Let's do this.
Brace it. Okay, everybody, if you just tuned in, this is This Week in Science. And, thank you for listening to the podcast. You are the reason that we are able to do what we do every week, bringing up to date and down to earth views on science and discoveries. And with your help, we can do even more. We can bring a sane perspective to this crazy world of misinformation. Head.org, click on the Patreon link and choose your level of support. Be a part of bringing sanity and science to more people. All right, we are going to continue with some science. It's catching. Do you have viruses, Justin?
Oh, yeah, so this is not the pathogenic thing exactly. This is published in Cell Host and Microbe. It's research by McGill University. They've discovered that there are viruses found in the intestinal tracts of children who have growth stunting that is affected their microbiome. And it's still correlative at this point, but they are seeing a definite connection between the viruses that are present, the microbiome within the intestines of these children, and a stunting in their growth. very interesting is that one of the things that we do on this show is we cover a lot of these stories. So every once in a while we talk about something and then it harkens back to a story that we've talked about before on this show, which is that there's a sort of transition in immunity that we have from our parents, from our mother, and then we are born and we lose this immunity. But there is a study back from, I think we did in 2014, from a Washington University in St. Louis, where they had discovered that the highest viral load that we have as humans occurs as infants up until about the age of 12 months. And during this time, there's a huge upsurge in viruses and bacteriophages that are devouring specific bacteria. Once those bacteria are consumed, those viruses sort of go away and we end up with what we are familiar with as our microbiome. So to see another connection in understanding how directly an immune system or our initial growth, because these children in this study were all under, I think, 2 years old. So this is well in that range of that having this really big effect. And then there's another study out this week, more bacteriophage excitement, this time out of University of California, Berkeley. They went to pregnant women in Tibet, hot springs, South African bioreactors, hospital rooms. They went to the ocean, they went to lakes, they dug underground looking for giant viruses. And they found
like the Mimi virus and those big viruses.
They found 351 new ones.
Oh.
And in that, they discovered one that has a 735,000 base pair genome, which is that's the biggest one ever found, and it is larger than a lot of bacteria. Also extremely fascinating in this, they found machinery to create RNA for ribosome. They found components of the proteins of Cas9. They found CRISPR. So this is a virus.
CRISPR is a bacterial.
This is
gene.
Yes. So this still needs to be traveled down all the way, and but this is potentially a virus that is able to co-opt the CRISPR system to train a bacteria to attack other viruses.
This is another kind of arrow in my quiver of the viruses are alive camp that I've been a part of since I was in high school.
This is creating RNA. There's DNA to create RNA for a ribosome to do this.
To make proteins.
Yes,
yeah.
Which it's going to utilize the bacteria to do that. But that's a thing that only life is supposed to do this.
Viruses are not supposed to do this, and so this is blurring the line. Crossed it, stepped over it, and looked back and said, "That's
what I can do. That's what I can do."
Rules.
Also, very interesting. They pulled these from around the world. Yeah. They're related, and so this is
old.
not. Yes, yeah. This is an old survived method of selection in these large genome viruses that have been a part of our planet surviving alongside everything else all of this time. So wonderful questions are being raised by this, and the blurring the lines between how you define life and what's not life, and what else these can do. The fact that it's making some sort of novel Cas9 type proteins means that within these virus genomes, we may find new editing techniques for editing genomes in living organisms.
Yeah, I wonder though if this is something that is novel that arose in these giant viruses, or if what happened is there's horizontal gene transfer within bacteria that we're well aware of. Genes can jump from one bacteria to another, and thus you have the spreading of antibacterial resistance. However, I wonder if something like that could have occurred with the virus, where the viruses maybe stole some bacterial DNA. So which is it?
Yeah, and the thing is that why not they could be the source for some. So
are the giant viruses the source? Are the bacteria the source?
And either way, there's adaptation and evolution involved, which is also a characteristic of life.
And
Still blasphemy.
yeah.
Back to the
So-
quiver.
And then harkening back again, because we covered this in giant virus genomes before, there's machinery to generate novel strands of in those viruses themselves. So they can also do their own mutation and selection based off of that. So yeah, it's going to be. This just happened. This just came out. So this is also kind of sometimes the annoying part about this story. You don't get to find out how it ends. This is how everything starts on this show. It's always the beginning of the stories. We don't always get to the ends of them.
It's like the end of every zombie movie. There's a horrible disease and it's still out there.
Right? In this case, though, these viruses, they're not horrible.
They might be good.
They might be good.
Yes.
Yes, obvious to people in the sciences that not all viruses are bad, but to the average person, especially right now, you forget sometimes that not all viruses are bad.
We could make a song about that.
Yeah.
Not all viruses are bad.
We'll work on it in post.
We'll work on it in post. You know, I do have a good song to play right now because do you know what time it is?
What time is it?
It's time for Blair's Animal Corner.
With Blair.
Loves are creatures, bright and small. 5 pairs, millipedes, no pet at all. What you're about animals, she's your girl, except for giant pandas.
What you got, Blair?
Oh, I have a Valentine's Day poem for you. Roses are red, violets are blue, opossums are pollinators, and so are you.
Whoa, what?
So I have a story about pollinators in Brazil. And pollinators, there's a lot of news, lots of conversations about pollinators, specifically with the honeybee, right? Honeybees are in trouble. Oh no, all of our food. We think about pollinators, we think about the birds and the bees. But there are other animals that can be pollinators too, including us.
Mosquitoes.
Mosquitoes, absolutely. Finally found a reason to have mosquitoes around. But in Brazil, there's a new study, 27 years in the making, which is one of the reasons I loved this story. There's kind of a cool human component here, providing that opossums are actually key in pollination of one specific plant. This is a fungus-like species. It's in the family Balaenophoraceae. And it is a bunch of tiny pale flowers. They're surrounded by bracts, which are the things like on an artichoke. It's like a scale or armor around the flowering part of a plant to kind of protect it from potential predators. And so it has to be peeled back to expose the flowers and the nectar. So bees obviously can't do that. Birds have a really hard time doing that. So in the 1990s, one researcher, Patricia Morolato, who's a professor from São Paulo State University in Brazil, and she kind of suggested that perhaps it's opossums. And the reason she thought that was that they captured one that had nectar on its nose. Like, how'd it get there?
Hot.
Yes, and it makes sense because
Pollen-nosed.
opossums have thumbs, which is perfect for peeling off those little scales.
Peeling off the scales and then sticking their nose right in it.
Yes, absolutely,
Yes.
delicious nectar. So they didn't find direct evidence. They couldn't catch this on tape or anything like that, so it didn't go published. But then, in 2017, another researcher at the same university, Felipe Amorim, hypothesized that a non-flying mammal was needed for pollination of this plant. And it took another 2 years. In April 2019, his grad students independently hypothesized that it was a rodent, but they had no proof. Then the following May, they installed night vision cameras. They were able to trap opossums on tape, removing the bracts, and then pushing their faces all the way into the flowers to eat the nectar, which was their direct evidence that the opossums were doing this. They watched the videos, and then Amor immediately called the original researcher, and he said, quote, "She sent me a voice message as excited as we were when we first saw the opossum visiting the flowers, because it was the first time she saw something she predicted 2.5 decades earlier." Just so cool.
I love that.
Yeah.
I also think it's important because a lot of times I think that when audiences are hearing scientists talk about things with some uncertainty, it kind of makes it seem like the scientists don't believe or don't have a. And what it is you're waiting to get actual evidence. You're waiting to get this video. You waited 2.5 decades to get the proof of this.
And probably waiting for the technology to arise to be able to have the night vision camera that was able to take the video and
that doesn't die after
that
2 hours.
Right, the battery life and the stability to be able to actually record the evidence.
Yeah, and these opossums ended up being so important because something they weren't expecting to find was that after they peeled it back, then other animals could come and be secondary pollinators. They're really interesting. There were bees and wasps, but they also had hummingbirds coming back to these plants. So there's this whole kind of cascade effect from the opossums using their thumbs to peel back the scales around this plant. So the next steps are to look at the efficacy and the efficiency of each group of flower visitor to see how much pollen they're moving, how much nectar they're removing, what kind of the life stages of these plants are, because it's possible the opossums peel it back, take a little sip, and they're done. And then there's all of this nectar and pollen left that these other animals have to distribute. But without the opossum to do that initial peeling, none of that other stuff is possible. So that's a really important thing to know. But this is so fun because the researcher who discovered this said he was 11 years old when this original hypothesis was brought up, and most of his students weren't even born yet. So
the longevity of the science.
Yeah, it's like 2.5 generations of work. So cool.
And tell us, this is the opossum and not the possum.
Yes, completely different animals. They're both marsupials, but they live in different places and they look pretty different. But so opossums, we have opossums here in the United States called Virginia opossums. There are opossums in South America, but if you're talking about possums, just with a P, that's usually in Australia.
So even though I talk about the possum who hides under the deck of the house next door, it is an opossum.
It is acceptable pronunciation according to the dictionary, but as an animal person, it makes me cringe because it confuses these two very different animals.
Well, it's like, calling you Blair or Blaze. It's not the same.
Is it like that? Okay.
Do we think that these possums, it's only this one specific flower, or do we think now that maybe they're involved in other kinds of pollination efforts? I mean, would it be a pollination effort?
So just nectar from one plant is probably not sustaining an entire mammal. So they're eating other things. So it's possible that they're eating other fruits or plants that require a similar manipulation, like that they've found this tactic and it works across a wide variety of things.
But the question is that plant dependent on the opossum?
Right, the plant probably is dependent.
Which is, it sounds like super dependent. But opossums are notorious for being able to eat everything. The United States, the Virginia opossum has 50 teeth. They have every kind of tooth. They can eat all of the things. Speaking from someone who's worked with them personally, and I at one point had 50 holes in my hand. It's,
But you like opossums and you don't like squirrels.
No.
We need to talk, Blair, after the show. Your biases are showing.
People keep possums as pets.
They should not. There's a difference between a domestic animal and an urbanized animal. And urbanized, I just did this conversation during a stage program at the zoo last week. Urbanized animals live around people, but they don't want to live with people. They take advantage of our presence, but they don't need us.
Trash pandas.
Yes,
and
exactly.
opossums.
And skunks,
yes.
and pigeons, and seagulls. They take advantage of us, but they don't need us. Dogs and cats and guinea pigs could not survive without us. Well, maybe some cats, but definitely not dogs or guinea pigs.
Well, and what's interesting is that this really, are there other gatekeeping species that open up pollination for a whole host of other creatures? Is this a team effort?
Yeah.
And they're the quarterback of this team? I mean, it's really an interesting, I want to see how many other creatures are involved.
Absolutely.
Yeah. This is a story that will go on many more decades.
One of the worst stories that we covered was a while back when we found out that mosquitoes are really important pollinators. Because that was the one thing I was like, we just didn't have mosquitoes.
But we need them.
But it turns out they have an extremely important role.
Not all mosquitoes. Anyway, we've got a bunch of science stories to get through in the last few 20 minutes of the show here. Should we talk about love some more?
Oh, please.
Always.
Yes. How many people are parents? Have children?
I have a 5-year-old.
Got some in the audience. You think about parental love as something for your children, yes? But what about love for your spouse? How many of you love your spouses or partners that you have those children with? Oh, we've got some hands raised. Not all the same hands. I noticed.
Wait, what was the question?
Never mind. So a study out of the University of Michigan looked at families in Nepal and asked the parents in these families whether they loved their spouses. And then they followed the families and their children for 12 years. They discovered that the parents who said that they loved their spouses were more likely to have children who finished school and married later in life, which is actually, in Nepal, that's a good sign of them focusing more on career and stability and potentially having a more stable family life later in life moving forward. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say, I don't know, it kind of sounds like if you have a first-hand example of married life as a child, you wait longer to get married? Is that what?
Right, so that is a good question, but I think societally, culturally in Nepal, it's a difference of being, going into marriage very young.
Oh, knowing that there's responsibility at the
You're
end.
not finishing school, and maybe getting into a relationship young and moving into those responsibilities too early, or in this case, having that example of familial strength and support and love within the family creates a more fostering environment for the child to go on and achieve more.
And could set a higher standard for what you would look for in a mate.
Or does it give them something that then there's not kind of a vacuum that needs to be filled by taking care of it quicker to build your own family, right? Because you have your home life that you can go home to with your loving parents, then you don't have to build a new family from scratch sooner.
And for anybody who might be a new member of the audience, this is also part of what we get to do on this show that scientists don't always get to do or can't do when they're communicating, which is we get to speculate wildly. We get to start with the story and then say, what else could that mean? What else could be involved in that? So that's part of why this is sometimes a little bit more fun for us than if we were just presenting on research.
Absolutely.
Well, I think this is related to Hans Rosling, who passed a few years ago, the Swedish statistician, and he talks about how having children later in life is fantastic for the family. Smaller family sizes means can take more time to establish a family. You're better prepared to take care of them, and it's inversely related to divorce rate, the age of first marriage. So there's a strong correlation even here in the U.S.
So, and this being in Nepal, I mean, perhaps what we're seeing is this kind of relationship is human. Is this kind of correlation is human in its global spread and reach.
Although word of caution, while about half marriages end in divorce,
in the United States,
the other half end in death. So,
which is worse. It's whatever. Which one do you like more? Okay, now I'm going to talk about vibrators. It's time to move on.
It's Valentine's Day.
It is Valentine's Day. So this study I found stimulating.
Nice.
Thank you. Published in the Journal of Psychology and Sexuality. PhD candidates at Queen's University really just wanted to find a study in which they could collaborate. They polled 488 women to find out when they report sexual satisfaction. They looked at the difference between women with male partners, and they discovered that women who use vibrators both when they're alone and with their partners reported greater sexual satisfaction. compared to women who just use vibrators by themselves. And taking the information from this study and these surveys, the researchers think it implies that what's going on in those relationships where the women are using the vibrator both times is it's not the vibrator use that is making the satisfaction greater. That's not it. It is the communication that is occurring between the partners, and that to engender a more satisfying sexual relationship with your partner, that communication is crucial, that an individual, a woman, needs to go into the relationship feeling empowered to tell her partner what she likes and doesn't like. And that if that is not happening, the woman is obviously not going to be satisfied. If you can't say, I don't like that, that's going to happen.
So I'm trying. The mechanics of the way this works, I mean, it's very clear when a male
Blair
is
is a very
satisfied.
visual thinker.
And yeah, I know. It's very clear when a male is satisfied.
Visualize the vibrator.
It is not always super clear when a female is satisfied.
Yes.
And so the only way to ensure that is communication.
Yeah.
So this makes perfect sense that communication would also lead to experimentation and other methods, and also, it's just about having a dialogue.
Yep.
Yeah.
Have a dialogue for your satisfaction. This is advice brought to you on Valentine's Day from TWIS. Tonight, over that glass of wine and that dinner and the box of chocolates, talk.
What I really want for Valentine's Day, fill in the blank.
It's not too late to pick something up on the way home, Valentine's Day gift. Yeah.
You know what you can pick up on the way home? An opinion.
Hey,
There we go. But look, I should be doing comedy.
you're already halfway there.
All right, tell me some bad news about Rapa Nui, Justin.
Okay, Rapa Nui. Everybody knows where Rapa Nui is, right? If we had a map, you could point to it. Okay, instead of calling it Rapa Nui, if I called it Easter Island, then you're not. So you could point to it on a map. Still no, right? But we know what we're talking about now. So Rapa Nui, Easter Island, it's the same thing. For those who can point it out on a map, it has been known for years that somewhere around 1200, it was colonized. Somewhere around year 1600, they had a complete collapse. They overused the resources on the island. They overcultivated. They cut down all the trees, and it collapsed. So by the time it was rediscovered by Western peoples, it was pretty much over. Well, that might be some revisionist history.
Oh,
turns
really?
out. Yeah, the archaeologists went in, they did every kind of radiocarbon dating, started looking at everything from the platforms that were built to the statues, and they find that actually the statue building was in full swing and persisted after colonization. And the decline in population was what you might expect from a colonized people. Slavery, disease, murder.
This is not the first time that this kind of revisionist history has occurred with colonialist activities.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's just another example. We've also seen past stories. We've talked about the barbaric activities of human sacrifice that took place throughout South America before the Spanish arrived, which we got because that's what the Spanish said was here when they arrived.
Things were already bad when we got here.
And so whenever a large burial site was discovered, it was looked at from the eye of having been a site of human sacrifice, when it may not have existed at all. So just another example of this. But Easter Island, even with disease and slavery and murder and colonization, they kept on making the statues. They kept working.
They were doing it all at the same time. Wow, this is just twisting my brain on how the entire society felt.
And it is also sadly used as propped up as something that we need to be aware of in our own resource consumption.
Yeah.
That we shouldn't be overusing and exploiting our own resources, or we might end up like them But maybe that's not what happened.
Maybe that's not the story.
Yeah, we just gotta watch out for like alien invasions or something of this nature, or something pandemic.
It's always
For
aliens.
instance, if that could.
Yeah, always aliens. Blair, you don't have aliens to talk about, do you?
No, I just have some more bad news for Justin. Sorry.
Sorry.
Mammoths, even if we figured out how to isolate genes, IVF into some elephants, it wouldn't be good.
What?
Their genes are garbage.
Why are you reading that garbage?
Wait, mammoth genes are garbage.
Yeah.
This is what you're saying. Okay.
So this is from University of Buffalo. Specifically, 4,000-year-old mammoth genes are garbage. This was the last population of woolly mammoths on Wrangel Island, a remote Arctic refuge off the coast of Siberia. Their genes are bad. They don't work. They were able to take some mammoth genes. They compared them to the genes of 3 Asian elephants and some more ancient mammoth genes that were more established, bigger population. And they found that these genes are missing a lot of important stuff. Basically, the genetic drift of having a teeny tiny population have caused a lot of deleterious mutations to the point where there's inhibited neurological development. That's not good. Inhibited male fertility.
Also not good for
bad.
maintaining a population.
Yeah, bad insulin signaling, and they appear to have no sense of smell.
Wait, no.
Yeah.
Okay, because
That big mammoth trunk. And the
elephants have how many 1,000 times better sense of smell than a human being?
Massively, yeah.
Enormous. So yeah, apparently they couldn't even smell the food that they were trying to eat on these islands. So the DNA is so bad from this teeny tiny population that trying to bring mammoths back, even if we took the older genes, if we'd have to bring back so many of them with such a diverse gene base, or this would happen like right away again, we'd have so much genetic drift that the mammoths, they're not going to happen. I'm sorry.
What? It's going to take a lot more work than they were prepared to do originally.
I'm going to say it's not going to happen.
Never say never to the mammoths,
I'm
Blair.
going to say never to this one.
I'd be willing to give up all pursuit of cloning or bringing back the mammoth. We can just agree on Neanderthals.
But maybe this is a very interesting point that Blair is bringing up. You know, where we get the genes or the genomes for these efforts to resurrect long extinct species matters. The time also, not just the location, but also the timing of the population matters, because if there is that genetic drift within a population, an isolated population, which occurs when population sizes start to dwindle more and more, then you're going to have less robust genetic material to make that resurrection happen. So this is not something that is only going to apply to mammoths. It's going to potentially apply to a lot of these efforts to resurrect many, from plants to insects to all sorts of different species.
So but then what you were talking about then is whether or not this was a man-made. Like, so for instance, the dodo bird would probably be perfectly acceptable because they all went at once. They didn't slowly die off.
But you have
Dodo.
to, the problem is you need genetic diversity, right?
Yeah.
So
Diversity is
if you wanted to bring back something that's extinct, you have to bring back so many of them with different genomes in order to create a self-containing, self-perpetuating population. It is quite an undertaking. But this is also an implication for current endangered species, because this is kind of the writing on the wall for if, and we know this already, right? If a population gets small enough, then there's almost nothing we can do. There's also a higher risk of one disease coming through, wiping out the entire population.
Suddenly you have the banana.
So if you're trying to bring an endangered species back, one of the things you need to do is potentially bring back extinct genotypes if you want to diversify the genetic background of that population.
So more than one Neanderthal.
Well, and I think the question is, what's the application here? Because obviously I want a pet mammoth, but this says it's important not just for mammoths, but also for de-extinction efforts right now. That even if we take genetic samples of endangered species, it may not be enough.
Right. So that seed vault, but of animal genes, needs to be much more diverse. Absolutely. Yeah.
Are we doing a seed vault for
Yes.
For
genetic
animals?
Yes.
material right now?
That is a thing that's happening right now. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So there's extinct. Gosh, I think it was certain rhino.
The
Rhino subspecies that we have frozen sperm and eggs. Or just they're on ice. They're waiting for us to figure out how to bring them back. But is it enough? That's really the question.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Is it ever enough?
Is it ever enough?
Will we be enough this Valentine's Day?
I was about to say, great, that is Valentine's Day.
It is. Oh my goodness, we have come to the end of our show. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here live in the audience. We appreciate you so much. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend. I would love to give shout outs to people who help the show. Fada, who helps with show notes and social media every week. Gord, who mans the chat room and keeps it civil. And Identity 4 for recording the show when we do the show live. And I would also like to thank our Patreon sponsors and the generous support of the Bros Welcome Fund this year. Additionally, I really do want to run down the list of our Patreon sponsors because that's what I do at the end of the show. So thank you to Paul Disney, Stu Pollock, Ed Dyer, Andrew Swanson, Craig Landon, Ed Phillips, Shane, Ken Hayes, Charlene Henry, Joshua Fury, Steve DeBell, Alex Wilson, Tony Steele, Richard Porter, Mark Mazaros, Bob Calder, Jack, Matthew Litwin, Jason Roberts, Bill K, Eric Knapp, Richard, Brian Condren, Dave Neighbor, Maddie Perrin, you're new. Hello. Ben Bignell, Justin Taylor, P.S., Josiah Zanger, Howard Tan, Donald Mundus, Sarah Ford, Fardanke, Matt Bass, Darwin Hannon, Patrick Ferraro, Jean Tellier, John Gridley, Corinne Benton, Al Joy, Sarah Chavis, Rodney Lewis, Tiffany Boyd, Mountain Sloth, Seth Bradley, Stephen Alderon, John Ratnaswamy, Dave Friedel, Daryl Myshak, Paul Ronovich, Sue Doster, Dave Wilkinson, Noodles, Kevin Reardon, Christoph Zuckerbeck, Ashley Spanch, Ulysses Atkins, Artyom, Rick Ravis, Paul, John McKee, Jason Olds, Ryan Carrington, Christopher Dreyer, Lisa Suzuki, Jim DePro, Greg Lively, Sean Lamb, Steve Leesman, Kurt Larson, Rudy Garcia, Marjorie Gary S., Robert Greg Briggs, Brendan Mitch, Christopher Rappin, Flying Out, Aaron Luthen, Matt Sutterberg, Kessenfeld, Kevin Parachan, Byron Lee, and EO. My goal is to be the next Micro Machines guy. Happy Valentine's Day to one and all. If any of you are interested in supporting us on Patreon and making my list longer to read, you can find information at patreon.com/thisweekinscience. We're going to be back right here tomorrow. One more live show at 11:30 a.m. from the 2020 meeting of the American Association for the Advancement of Science in Seattle, Washington, on the SciMike Studio stage, presented by This Study Shows, a Wiley podcast. These shows are going to be published.
Yeah. If you want to listen to the podcast, you could just Bing us. Bing This Week in Science in your iTunes directory, and we should show right up.
Is that because we're in Seattle? Good. Okay.
For more information on anything you heard here today, our show notes will be available at www.twis.org. You can find our links, videos, all sorts of good stuff. You can also sign up for our newsletter there.
You can also contact us directly. Email Kirsten at thisweekinscience.com, Justin at twistminion@gmail.com, or Blair at blairbaz@twis.org. Just be sure to put TWIS, TWIS, somewhere in your subject line. Otherwise, your email will be spam filtered into oblivion. Oh, we're also on the Twitter. What are we on Twitter? At TWIS Science, at Dr. Kiki, at JacksonFly, and at Blair's Menagerie. We love your feedback. If there's a story you'd like us to cover, address, a suggestion for an interview, please let us know.
We'll be back here next week, and we hope you'll join us again for more great science news.
And if you've learned anything from the show, remember,
it's all in your head. Thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate it. And we have flags if you would like pins and stickers and patches.
I have the very last 3 2020 calendars with my art in them. If anyone wants one, reduced price. There's only 3 left.
I'm gonna tell my advice. Show them how to stop the robot with a simple device. I'll reverse global warming with a wave of my hand. And all it'll cost you is a couple of grand. This week's science is coming your way. So everybody listen to what I say. Science entertainment for all that it's worth. And I'll broadcast my opinion all over the earth. Because it's this week
But inside we're
This week in science, science. This week in science, This week in science,
Excellent work. Any more questions?
Great. Hi.
Yeah, no, it's super fun to see you guys post all your videos too. It's very fun to watch.